So when I started this channel, I knew I would be competing in a sea of automotive content. And you can see that just by opening up YouTube and looking at the number of garages that show up on your homepage when your home feed when you open up YouTube. So when I started this, I knew it was going to be a slog getting recognized in that sea of automotive content. So I mean, we're focusing mainly on the Jeeps, the CJ2, the MB, the CJ5. But I knew that there wasn't enough work to do on those Jeeps to sustain an entire channel. Now the CJ5 may be an exception because we're literally trying to put that thing back together, restore it, rebuild it, make modifications, which is okay. So we can sustain at least some series of videos that way. But I was also very much interested in talking about culture, the automotive culture, talk about the reasons why people get involved with cars. What is it about cars or Jeeps that really get inside your soul and give you an emotional connection to these things that a TV may not, So that was sort of the roots, the beginning of the channel. I wanted to combine all of that in a way that told personal stories, that looked at culture from the past and try to relate it to the great American experiment, the great American culture as it morphs and becomes whatever it becomes. So my first car was a 1966 Ford Mustang, yellow. Just like this one, just like this model. When I painted this all these years ago, I painted it the wrong yellow. It's a much more pale yellow, but it was still a 66 convertible Mustang. Had a straight six, 200, 3-speed. And I learned very young, or very early, that with that 6-cylinder, you could take out a lot of transmissions. And I did. I took out 3 transmissions because you can't push a 6-cylinder to do things that you would want an 8-cylinder to do. And I can remember that the last time I lost a transmission, I lost that transmission in the middle of downtown Boston. Now, if you're not from New England, if you've never been to Boston, then you'll probably never understand the convoluted nature of all the streets in Boston. They literally built those streets around cow paths and wagon trails, and they're all over the place. There's nothing square or directional. It's just they're in all kinds of directions. Anyway, so I had gone to Boston because I wanted to go buy tickets for a play. And I got down there, I got my tickets, and I started heading out of town. And on my way out of town, I believe I was on Tremont Street, if I remember right, the transmission let go. And all I had was reverse and third gear. And that little 6-cylinder worked its butt off to get that car moving from every stop. And there was many stops because downtown Boston was just full of cross streets and street lights, and every time you wanted to start, you'd have to start in third gear and feather that clutch. And by the time I got home, and I did get home, that clutch was burning. It was not happy. Fortunately, once we got up on the interstate, we could just cruise along in third gear. There was no grinding, there was no noise, there was just third gear. And I can remember we had to go through a toll booth because back in the day you didn't have the cameras. You had to literally stop and throw your coins in. There were no attendants. There were attendants, but most of these were just toss your coins in. And I don't remember if it was 50 cents or 25 cents, but going through the toll booths, and there were two of them, I had to throw my coins in. But I didn't want to slow down too slow or come to a stop, because I didn't want to have to stress that transmission or that clutch anymore, because I really wanted to get home. So I'd come up at some speed, say 10, 15, 20 miles an hour, and I literally would throw my coins at the coin collector, and hopefully that the coins would get in. But the funniest part about that is that while I'm doing that, and while I'm going through that thing at 15 or 20 miles an hour, it took a while for the coin to cycle down into the basket and get read by the coin collector or the machine. And by the time it finally read it, I was already past the little alarm, and I look back and the alarms are going off and it's ringing and making all kinds of noise, and then finally the coin registers in the coin collector and the alarms go off, and I had to do that twice. And it was an experience. That was the last transmission that I had to put in that car. Lots of adventures. If you're an automotive kind of guy, if you're a kind of guy that uses his car for everything, we live in a very rural area, so if we wanted to go anywhere or do anything, we quite literally had to go in a car, And that car became a significant part of my life. And my dad bought the car for me. He didn't buy the car for me, but he found the car for me. And this car got traded in at a Dodge dealership. Now, again, this is a small town, small rural town. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knew Avery Dodge, and that's where the car was. So we had to go down and negotiate with Avery Dodge to get this car. It was only 6 years old at the time, had pretty low mileage, but it was my first car. And we negotiate this thing, and I buy this car in 1971, I believe it was 71 or 72, for $750. And everything worked. The top would go up and down. It was electric top. The motor was fine. Everything ran fine. Of course, I wanted a V8, but I got a straight 6, which probably for somebody who was 18 years old, 17 years old, that wasn't a bad thing. So I got this car. I dated in this car. I went to school in this car. I went places with this car that a car shouldn't go. I got the car stuck. And it was my daily driver. As it aged, things would happen to it. The back window was plastic. Back in those early days, they didn't have the glass backs, or at least the Mustang didn't have the glass back. It had the plastic, and if you remember those plastics would turn really yellow, and after a while you couldn't see through them. And when it let go, it just let go. And at 18, 19 years old, you don't have a lot of money, or at least I didn't have a lot of money, to go and source a new top or a new window for the thing, so we taped it up. And this Mustang did not have the best heater. Then you take and you let that back window go. And the consequences are that in the wintertime, this car was really very, very cold. So I would go back and forth to college, and it was about an hour and 3/4 from home to the school. And I would have to wear my wool, my long johns, my boots. I'd have boots on, and those boots were all insulated, and I would have to literally drive back and forth in the wintertime to college, all decked out and dressed like that, because otherwise I couldn't. Yeah, I mean, you just freeze your butt off going back and forth. And that's what I did. That's what we did, because you didn't whine, you didn't complain, you just you did what had to be done. And I used that car until, I bought it in 71, 72, I don't remember exactly. And I drove that car until 74 and a half. And these old Mustangs, the rear shackle actually connected to the rear trunk, or the trunk pan. And of course the gas tank was part of that trunk pan, but up on the side of that, the unibody, that's where the shackles would get mounted. And this is the Northeast, and in the Northeast, everything in the wintertime is salted. And that salt just raises havoc with sheet metal and cars. And Ford was not building cars that with materials that were designed to last generations. And you used it, I used it, and the roads were salty. But that salt, over years, really took its toll. The cars just didn't last. They just rotted, they rusted bad, and it didn't matter what the car was. And this one rusted, it was no exception. And what happened is those rear shackles actually rusted right up through the trunk. And I remember the day that it happened, the car suddenly settled, woof, down onto the rear pumpkin, onto the rear differential. And same thing, I was not home and I had to get home. So you put it in first gear, you let out the clutch, you accelerate, and the torque on the rear end would literally rotate the springs, the leaf springs, and the car would raise itself up. It would pivot. And then as soon as you accelerated and put the clutch in, that torque goes away and the car literally settled, bang, down back onto the pumpkin. Shift into second, same thing, let out the clutch, accelerate, the car would lift itself up. Put in the clutch, bang, go back down onto the pedestal, onto the pumpkin. Third gear, same thing, bang, would settle back down onto the pumpkin. But we got home. So I retired the car. And I had no car for a number of months. I would have to borrow my dad's pickup, his Ford truck, which I totally enjoyed. Dad wasn't always so happy about it. Dad could be a little possessive about his cars, which I guess is okay. June or July of 75, I bought my first new car, and that was that 75 Pontiac. The Mustang, I ended up having to retire it. And back when I retired it, there were not automotive restoration parts dealers like there is today. You can buy tubs for these Jeeps. You can buy entire Mustang bodies today. That didn't exist back when I retired this car. And I didn't want to get rid of it because I loved the Mustang. I became a true Mustang enthusiast because of that car, and I didn't want to get rid of it. So I tried to save it. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I tried to save it, and I put it out next to my dad's barn. That would end up destroying the car, and the car literally, because it sat on the ground, and the ground would suck up the moisture, and the car began to even rot in more and more places. But I still wanted to rebuild it. I still wanted to continue to own that car until one day, it was after I got married, it became obvious that was a dream, but it wasn't a dream based on any kind of reality. Again, because the stuff just wasn't there. It wasn't available. And I ended up selling it to a guy a couple towns over who made his living restoring cars. He was into a lot of European cars, restoring European cars, but he wanted that car, and I sold it for cheap money because I was more interested in just getting it out of the property. So I sold it to him. And he came in with a trailer and he hauled it up onto that trailer and took it away. Now I knew where the place was. And for years and years and years after he bought the car, I would see that car parked in a series of cars in his restoration shop waiting to be worked on. And I bet that car sat there for 15 years. And then one day, the business got sold and that Mustang disappeared. And even though I only drove it for 3 or 4 years, I got to see that car for another 20 years between having it sit in my dad's field or next to the barn and seeing it in the parking lot of this restoration shop. And then it just was gone. So guys, that's my car story. So if you enjoyed this kind of content, leave a comment. There's a lot of more stories there's a lot more stories with this little Mustang, or that involve the Mustang in one way or another, because you got to remember that an 18, 19, 20-year-old owned this, and 18, 19, 20-year-olds didn't always make the best decisions. So there's more stories on that Mustang. There's more stories on the Pontiac. There's more stories on a lot of cars that have come through my life. If you enjoyed this kind of content, if you enjoyed this, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Leave a comment. If you have car stories, tell me your car stories. I think car stories makes the culture. It makes the reason for doing what we do, for owning these old Jeeps, for restoring these old Jeeps, for maintaining these old Jeeps. It is a little bit the nostalgia. It is a little bit the memories. It is a little bit what it does to your emotions and what it does to your soul. But if you enjoyed this, please let me know. Leave a comment and tell me if you'd like to hear more of this. Guys, I appreciate you being here. Love you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.